Hi there. What an unmitigated joy to be back in Alberta. I swear, this is the engine of my speaking career, Alberta. I love to come here, and I seem to come here more than I go anywhere else. Thank you to Public Interest Alberta. I think this is a tremendously important and exciting conference. I'm really, really honored to be kicking it off. I know that not all of you can be going to the conference because there's a lot of people here just for tonight. And I think that speaks to the urgency of this issue. It is frankly a joy and a relief and almost a sensual thrill for me to talk about privatization without having to couch it in any other discussion. I'm obsessed with privatization. I'm a privatization nerd. That word just lights up and leaps out of news articles at me and has done for the last 15 years. And normally when I'm giving a speech, whether it's about education or globalization or marketing to children, I always sort of negotiate with myself beforehand about how much I actually can talk about privatization without boring the hell out of people, putting them to sleep or just revealing myself for the naked policy wonk that I am. So to be given license to talk only about privatization for pretty much as long as you'll have me is just thrilling. I also am genuinely glad to be in Canada at this particular moment. Bill told you a little bit about my new gig. I've been living in the United States for 3 months. I'm hosting this remarkable show on a remarkable new network called Al Jazeera English. I could see from some of your grimaces and furrowed brows that you are as ignorant about Al Jazeera English as Al Jazeera English is about Canada. That will change at some point. I want to tell you very briefly about it because I know that I left CBC after launching a couple of shows that were wildly successful and throttled in the crib, as is the way these days. Al Jazeera was launched about 1.5 years ago. The Arabic network has been around since the early 1990s, but the English network was launched less than 1.5 years ago, and in that time, they've built an audience of 110 million households around the world. It's taking on CNN International and BBC World as an international English language broadcaster. It's doing it with the resources of Al Jazeera English is essentially the public broadcaster of Qatar. And so it's sort of the Alberta model. If you had any appetite to use your abundant natural resources for something like public broadcasting, you can just imagine what might happen. Al Jazeera English doesn't have any more energy wealth than Alberta does. I'm sure it has less. But it's got 60 bureaus around the world in 1.5 years, building a massive audience. They've cherry-picked a huge number of disaffected Brits, the occasional sane American, and a bunch of CBCers to do sort of old-school television journalism, which, because I didn't start in the game until 1990, I'm not sure if I've ever even tasted. But the premise for launching the network was explicitly, this is how they put it, to reverse the global flow of information from south to make it south to north rather than north to south. In other words, to give people in the global south the voice and the platform to tell their own stories to the rest of the world. Now, this is a tremendously progressive project. I mean, the corporate slogan is giving voice to the voiceless. So you can see why I leapt at the opportunity to work with this bunch of folks. And what I'm doing is I'm doing a weekly half-hour show looking at the issues that should be on the front burner in the U.S. election and aren't. And when they pitched the show to me that way, I was like, well, that's what I always do. This will be easy. But so I've been doing stories on New Orleans and the destruction of public housing, on Miami and the Cuban lobby. I just did a show about the Israel lobby in Washington, D.C. And I've spent the last 4 or 5 days in rural Arkansas, looking at the rise of hate crimes in America, which is quite staggering. And it corresponds precisely, hi there, with the ugliness of the immigration debate as it started to emerge in the U.S. Political cycles. So I went to Arkansas and met with some really robust racist people who live in their odd little compounds with their family members, spouses, sometimes the same individuals. And, you know, so it was a kind of an odd situation for me to be in. So, you know, there I am, a Jew who is highly critical of Israel, working for a network which is grossly caricatured in the United States as a mouthpiece for terrorism, talking to people who advocate the ethnic cleansing of Latinos in a country where the working class speaks Spanish. So you understand that I arrive at your doorstep cosmically confused. So to be here talking to Alberta progressives about privatization is just so goddamn normal for me that it is bliss, and I appreciate it. You know who I am, I know who you are, so let's get started. I've been living in America for 3 months. I got there. The network is putting me up in a weird corporate apartment hotel a block and a half from the White House. I forgot my shaving cream on my very first night in Washington, went to the pharmacy 2 blocks away, came out at 11 o'clock at night, and I was across the street from the IMF. I was like, I got tear gassed here. Wait a second, what am I, you know, it's very odd to be living in the United States at this moment. And I want to deal up front with the notion of anti-Americanism, something which people on the left are regularly accused of. Living in the United States is really fascinating. It's an intensely interesting election moment, and I think the United States is a very important place for us to get more real information and less rhetorical churning. And you know, there's just an extraordinary number of stories in the United States. Most of them I find pretty scary and disturbing, but there are tremendous working class movements and black-brown solidarity and immigrants' rights organizations and communities fighting back against war and privatization and right-wing economics in inspiring ways. And so I think that the value of looking at the United States is, of course, the value of the cautionary tale. And I'll be drawing fairly heavily on my experiences in the last few months as I talk to you about privatization tonight. And in many senses, you know, to look at privatization in America is to bring back a report on a foreboding future that we can still avoid in Canada. And it's a country of intense extremes, as you know, and it has an amazing effect on people. I was struck by this on the plane coming in this morning when I read John Ibbitson, which I never do anymore, which is such a delight. John Ibbitson, the right-wing America correspondent for the Globe and Mail. I can tell you don't read him either, and that's good. Ibbitson, who's not exactly known as a member of the Fourth International, has discovered from spending enough time in the United States that, and this is the lead sentence of his column today, that Americans who want their children to get a good education should move to a state with high taxes. Now, for a guy like this is sort of through the looking glass. But he's discovered a study that shows that, sort of stop me if you've heard this before, that geography and race and poverty play a role in the quality of education. And that these things might be related to the presence or absence of a tax base in a public sphere and a commitment of public dollars towards this all-important public service. Clap loud enough, he might hear you. So this was the paragraph that just jumped out at me. John Ibbitson in the Globe today. One statistic had troubling implications for those who believe that governments should tax citizens as little as possible. He's tipping his hand, just reminding you who he is. States with a high tax burden, that's right-wing speak for still functioning public sphere. States with a high tax burden did a far better job of minimizing child poverty than low-taxing states. Well, duh. But the US has that effect on people. You know, you go with your own stereotypes and caricatures and you find that it's far better and far worse than you thought.